The fastest way to destroy someone is to embarrass them in public, and Ethan Cole was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Claire Morgan stood at the top of the marble staircase outside the Grand Astoria Hotel and stared at the glowing chandeliers through the glass ceiling above the ballroom. Just 24 hours earlier, a judge had finalized her divorce papers. 5 years of marriage had ended in less than 15 minutes inside a cold courtroom in downtown Manhattan. No tears, no begging, no dramatic goodbye. Ethan had barely even looked at her when he signed the documents. But tonight was different. Tonight, he wanted an audience. Claire adjusted the sleeve of her simple black dress as luxury cars lined the curb outside the gala entrance. Men in tailored tuxedos stepped onto the red carpet beside women covered in diamonds and designer gowns worth more than most people's yearly salaries. Flashbulbs exploded across the sidewalk while reporters shouted names from behind velvet ropes. Claire almost turned around twice before entering. Not because she was afraid of Ethan, but because deep down, she already knew what this night was really about. Humiliation. Ethan never did anything halfway. The massive ballroom shimmered with gold light and crystal decorations hanging from 30-foot ceilings. A live orchestra played near the center fountain, while servers carried silver trays filled with champagne through crowds of CEOs, investors, politicians, and social media influencers pretending to care about charity. Claire kept her head low as she walked past groups of wealthy guests whispering around her. Some recognized her immediately. She could feel it in their eyes. The ex-wife. The woman Ethan replaced. The woman who lost everything. A giant digital screen above the stage displayed the logo for Cole Ventures International beside photos of Ethan smiling confidently in magazine covers and business interviews. Forbes called him one of America's fastest rising tech executives under 40. CNBC called him the king of luxury acquisitions. Claire remembered when he used to eat instant ramen with her inside their tiny Brooklyn apartment because they couldn't afford groceries after rent. Funny how success rewrites people. Claire, a voice said behind her. She turned slowly and saw Olivia Harper approaching with a forced smile. Olivia was the wife of one of Ethan's investors. Wow, I honestly didn't think you'd come tonight. Claire gave a polite smile. I almost didn't. Olivia glanced around nervously before lowering her voice. Listen, people are talking. Ethan's been drinking. Vanessa too. Maybe you should leave before things get messy. Claire looked toward the ballroom entrance. Too late. The entire room suddenly shifted with excitement as camera flashes exploded near the front doors. Heads turned instantly. Conversations stopped. Ethan Cole had arrived. He walked into the ballroom wearing a custom midnight blue tuxedo with one hand casually inside his pocket like he owned the entire city. But it wasn't Ethan that captured everyone's attention. It was the woman beside him. Vanessa Reed smiled like she had already won. Her silver gown wrapped around her like liquid light while diamonds sparkled against her neck under the chandeliers. Claire immediately recognized the necklace. Her stomach tightened. 3 years ago, Ethan had promised to help Claire buy that necklace for their anniversary after she saw it during a charity auction. A month later, he told her the company couldn't afford unnecessary spending. Now it rested on Vanessa's chest. Ethan spotted Claire almost instantly, and he smiled. Not warmly, not awkwardly, like a man spotting prey exactly where he expected it to be. Vanessa leaned closer to him and whispered something into his ear before both of them laughed quietly. Claire felt every pair of eyes in the ballroom move toward her. Ethan slowly guided Vanessa through the crowd directly toward the center stage, while photographers followed behind them. Ladies and gentlemen, the host announced excitedly, please welcome tonight's primary sponsor and one of New York's most influential entrepreneurs, Mr. Ethan Cole. Applause thundered across the ballroom. Ethan waved casually before taking the microphone with perfect confidence. Vanessa stood beside him with one hand resting possessively against his arm. Claire stayed frozen near the back of the room. Thank you all for being here tonight. Ethan began smoothly. This gala means a lot to me because this year has been transformative. Soft laughter spread through the audience. Ethan smiled wider. Sometimes in life, you don't realize someone is holding you back until they're finally gone. More laughter. Claire's fingers tightened around her clutch purse. Ethan continued speaking while staring directly at her from across the ballroom. For years, I convinced myself loyalty mattered more than ambition. I thought love meant carrying dead weight while hoping things would magically improve. Vanessa squeezed his arm dramatically as several guests smirked knowingly. But then I met someone who reminded me what success actually looks like. Ethan turned toward Vanessa and kissed her hand while cameras flashed wildly around them. Claire heard whispers spreading through the crowd like poison. That's his ex-wife over there. She actually showed up? God, that's embarrassing. Ethan slowly raised his champagne glass toward the audience. To new beginnings. The ballroom erupted into applause again. Then Ethan glanced toward the production crew beside the stage. Actually, before dinner starts, I wanted to share something personal tonight. Claire's chest tightened immediately. No. Ethan smiled coldly. A reminder of how far someone can fall when they stop believing in your vision. The giant digital screen behind him suddenly flickered to life, and Claire's blood ran cold. Old private photos appeared across the massive screen above the ballroom. Photos Ethan promised he deleted years ago. Claire crying inside their first apartment after they lost electricity because they couldn't pay the bill. Claire exhausted and wearing sweatpants while helping Ethan pack orders during the early days of his business. Claire sitting alone in a hospital waiting room after suffering a stress-induced panic attack during Ethan's first major company crisis. Gasps spread quietly across the ballroom. Then came the laughter. Soft at first, then louder. Vanessa covered her mouth dramatically like she was shocked while struggling not to smile. Ethan shook his head with fake sympathy. You know, some people are simply not built for success. Claire felt heat rise behind her eyes but refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Ethan stepped closer to the microphone. And honestly, divorce was probably the best business decision I've ever made. The crowd exploded with uncomfortable laughter and applause while phones lifted into the air recording everything. Claire stood completely still as hundreds of strangers watched her humiliation like live entertainment. Then Vanessa looked directly at Claire from beside the stage and smiled slowly. A smile so calm, so cruel, that Claire suddenly realized something terrifying. This wasn't spontaneous. Every second of tonight had been planned. Claire could feel hundreds of eyes burning into her as the final photo disappeared from the giant screen above the ballroom. The laughter slowly faded into scattered whispers, but the damage had already been done. Some guests looked uncomfortable. Others looked entertained. Most simply looked relieved that the humiliation was happening to someone else. Ethan lowered the microphone with a satisfied smile, like he had just delivered the performance of the night. Vanessa clapped softly beside him before leaning close enough to kiss his cheek while cameras flashed around them again. Claire remained completely still near the back of the ballroom. She refused to let them see her break. That was exactly what Ethan wanted. He wanted tears. He wanted anger. He wanted proof that he still had power over her. Instead, Claire slowly lifted her champagne glass from a passing tray and took a calm sip while the room watched her carefully. That tiny movement confused people. Ethan noticed it immediately. His smile weakened for half a second. Vanessa, however, stepped forward confidently. She had spent months waiting for this moment. Wow, Vanessa said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. I honestly thought she would leave by now. A few people laughed nervously. Claire looked at her without expression. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. You know, Claire, I should probably thank you. Claire said nothing. Vanessa smiled wider. If you had actually supported Ethan instead of holding him back all those years, he never would have realized he deserved better. Ethan chuckled softly beside her, while several investors nearby exchanged awkward glances. Claire recognized many of those faces. Men who used to sit in her kitchen at 2 in the morning eating cheap takeout, while brainstorming business deals with Ethan during the early startup years. Back when nobody believed in him except her. Funny how success erased memory. Vanessa slowly stepped down from the stage with the confidence of someone who thought she had already won the entire war. Her silver heels clicked against the marble floor as she approached Claire directly. Phones quietly lifted around the ballroom again. People sensed more drama coming. You know what your problem was? Vanessa asked softly once she stood face to face with Claire. You loved him like he was still broke. Claire stared at her calmly. Vanessa leaned closer. I loved him like a billionaire. Several guests nearby reacted with quiet laughter. Claire could smell Vanessa's expensive perfume mixed with champagne. It reminded her of department store fragrance counters and fake smiles. Vanessa glanced down at Claire's simple black dress. Did you even try tonight? Claire finally spoke. Her voice remained calm and steady. Did all this attention make you feel special yet? Vanessa's smile twitched slightly. The answer caught her off guard. Ethan quickly stepped in before Vanessa could respond. Claire, he said smoothly, do not do this here. Claire slowly turned toward him. Do what? Ethan lowered his voice. Cause a scene. Claire almost laughed. Cause a scene? He had just displayed private photos of her pain to an entire ballroom full of strangers. But now he wanted dignity. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks casually while speaking like a man trying to maintain control. You should go home. There is no reason to embarrass yourself further. Claire looked at him carefully. For a moment, she barely recognized the man standing in front of her. The expensive tuxedo, the polished smile, the cold eyes. This was not the exhausted dreamer who used to fall asleep on her shoulder while building spreadsheets at their tiny kitchen table. That version of Ethan disappeared a long time ago. Vanessa suddenly reached toward Claire's shoulder and brushed invisible lint from her dress with fake sympathy. Honestly, Claire, I almost feel bad for you. Claire glanced down briefly at Vanessa's hand touching the fabric. Do not touch me. Vanessa smirked. Or what? The room became quieter. Even the orchestra seemed softer now. People were openly watching. Waiting. Vanessa leaned in closer again. You lost your husband, your penthouse, your future, and somehow you still showed up here pretending you belong in this room. Claire met her eyes evenly. I do belong here. Vanessa laughed openly this time. Sweetheart, this room belongs to people with power. Claire almost smiled at that sentence. Almost. But before she could answer, Vanessa suddenly lifted her champagne glass dramatically while turning toward nearby guests. Oops. The liquid splashed directly across the front of Claire's black dress. Gasps spread instantly through the ballroom. Some guests clearly realized it was intentional. Others pretended not to notice. Champagne dripped slowly down the dark fabric while Vanessa covered her mouth with fake horror. Oh my God, Vanessa said theatrically. I am so sorry. That was completely an accident. Claire looked down at the stain silently. Then she looked back up at Vanessa. Not angry, not emotional, just quiet. That silence unsettled Vanessa more than screaming ever could. Ethan stepped closer immediately, but not to help Claire. He looked irritated, embarrassed. Claire, he muttered under his breath, just leave. Claire stared at him for several seconds. You really do not see it yet, do you? Ethan frowned slightly. See what? Claire slowly removed a white cloth napkin from a nearby table and dabbed the champagne from her dress with calm precision. The difference between someone who built you, she said softly, and someone who is spending what you built. Vanessa's expression darkened instantly. Ethan's jaw tightened. Nearby guests exchanged nervous glances. Vanessa folded her arms. That is funny coming from someone who walked away with almost nothing in the divorce. Claire looked at her directly. Did I? Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but suddenly stopped when Claire casually reached into her purse and adjusted a folded document inside before closing it again. The movement lasted less than 2 seconds, but Ethan noticed it immediately. His eyes narrowed. What is that? He asked. Claire smiled faintly for the first time all night. Nothing you need to worry about. Ethan's expression shifted slightly. For the first time since entering the ballroom, uncertainty appeared in his face. Vanessa quickly grabbed his arm possessively. Ignore her, she whispered. She is bluffing. But Ethan kept staring at Claire, because deep down, he remembered something everyone else in the room had forgotten. Claire never bluffed. Across the ballroom, several executives quietly checked their phones after receiving sudden notifications. One investor frowned at his screen. Another whispered something urgently to his assistant. A third glanced toward Ethan with visible confusion. Claire noticed all of it. Ethan noticed too. The atmosphere inside the ballroom began changing almost invisibly, like pressure building before a storm. Vanessa, still unaware, forced another smile toward Claire. You know what I think? She said coldly. I think you came tonight hoping Ethan would regret leaving you. Claire looked at her calmly. No, Vanessa tilted her head. Then why are you here? Claire's eyes slowly shifted toward the massive ballroom entrance behind them. Because, she said quietly, my family told me not to come alone. Ethan frowned immediately. Family. Claire never answered. Because at that exact moment, the enormous ballroom doors suddenly opened. The entire ballroom turned toward the entrance as silence spread across the marble floor like a wave. Even the orchestra stopped playing. Outside the towering glass doors, headlights from 3 black luxury vehicles cut across the front entrance in perfect formation. The first car stopped directly at the center staircase. Then the second, then the third. Every valet near the entrance instantly straightened their posture. Several executives near the front exchanged confused looks before quickly checking their phones again. Ethan frowned. Who the hell is that? Vanessa tried to laugh casually. Probably another donor trying too hard to make an entrance. But her voice sounded less confident now. The ballroom doors opened fully as 6 security men in dark suits stepped inside first. Not aggressive, controlled, professional. The kind of security that did not need to prove authority because everyone already recognized it. Behind them walked 3 men who instantly changed the atmosphere of the entire room without saying a single word. The oldest entered first. Tall, calm, wearing a charcoal gray suit with a silver watch that probably cost more than most luxury cars parked outside. Alexander Morgan. Directly behind him came Daniel Morgan with the cold confidence of someone used to making billion-dollar decisions before breakfast. Then Vincent Morgan, the youngest, carrying the relaxed expression of a man who could destroy careers with one phone call and still make dinner reservations afterward. The reaction inside the ballroom was immediate. People stood up, literally stood up. Investors abandoned conversations mid-sentence. A senator near the front adjusted his tie nervously. One of Ethan's board members whispered, "Oh my God." Vanessa looked confused. "Who are they?" Ethan did not answer, because suddenly he looked pale. Claire remained completely still as the 3 brothers walked through the ballroom side by side. Their presence swallowed the attention of every person in the room. Even the cameras shifted away from Ethan and Vanessa now. All focus had changed direction. Alexander Morgan was not just wealthy. He was one of the most powerful investment figures in the country. Morgan Capital Holdings controlled technology firms, real estate groups, pharmaceutical companies, media networks, and private equity funds worth billions. Daniel handled international acquisitions. Vincent controlled venture partnerships and political relationships. Together, the Morgan brothers had built one of the most feared business empires in America. And according to every major magazine for the last 5 years, they had no sister. Or at least, nobody had seen her publicly in years. Ethan stared as Alexander's eyes locked directly onto Claire from across the ballroom. Not once did the brothers acknowledge anyone else in the room. Not the celebrities. Not the investors. Not the politicians. Just Claire. Vanessa noticed Ethan's expression immediately. "Why are you looking at her like that?" Ethan swallowed slowly. "No." Claire watched her brothers approach with the same calm expression she had maintained all night, but her fingers tightened slightly around her purse for the first time. Alexander stopped directly in front of her. For one long second, the ballroom held its breath. Then Alexander quietly removed his suit jacket and placed it around Claire's shoulders, covering the champagne stain on her dress. "You should have called us sooner," he said gently. The room froze. Daniel looked down at the stain still visible near the edge of the fabric before slowly lifting his eyes toward Ethan and Vanessa. "Who spilled a drink on our sister?" Nobody answered. Vanessa's face lost color instantly. Ethan looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. Vincent glanced toward the giant digital screen above the ballroom, where Claire's private photos still remained frozen from Ethan's presentation. His jaw tightened slightly. Interesting party. Several guests immediately lowered their phones and turned off recordings. The atmosphere had shifted from entertainment to danger in less than 30 seconds. Ethan forced an awkward laugh before stepping forward. "Mr. Morgan," he said carefully, "I think there has been some misunderstanding here." Alexander finally looked at him, and somehow that was worse than being ignored. "Ethan Cole," Alexander said calmly. "We know exactly who you are." Ethan tried to recover his confidence. "I had no idea Claire was connected to your family." Vincent gave a quiet smile with no warmth behind it. "That is because Claire spent 5 years hiding from us." Murmurs exploded across the ballroom. Investors whispered urgently to each other, while several guests immediately searched articles about the Morgan family on their phones. Vanessa looked between Claire and the brothers in disbelief. "Wait, this is a joke, right?" Nobody even acknowledged her. Daniel stepped closer to Claire and looked at her carefully. "Did he touch you?" Claire shook her head once. "No." Daniel nodded slowly, but his expression remained cold as ice while looking back toward Ethan. "Good." Ethan quickly raised both hands slightly. Look, whatever this appears to be, tonight was just humor between former spouses. Claire almost laughed at that sentence. Humor. Ethan had publicly displayed her lowest moments in front of hundreds of strangers. Now he wanted to call it humor because power had entered the room wearing expensive suits. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward defensively. Claire never told anyone she came from money. Alexander looked at her casually. And Vanessa blinked. Well, if she kept that secret, maybe she wanted people to misunderstand her. Vincent finally looked directly at Vanessa for the first time all night. You mean the way you misunderstood her 10 minutes ago? Vanessa opened her mouth, but no words came out. Ethan tried, changing direction quickly. Claire and I had personal issues, but there is no reason to turn this into something public. Daniel glanced slowly around the ballroom. You already made it public. Silence. Absolute silence. Ethan's investors looked increasingly uncomfortable now. One executive quietly stepped away from Ethan entirely after receiving another notification on his phone. Across the ballroom, a reporter whispered urgently into an earpiece while staring at Claire. The story had completely changed. Ethan was no longer the successful billionaire hosting the gala. Now he looked like a man who had accidentally insulted the wrong family in America. Alexander turned back toward Claire, his voice softening immediately. Mother wanted to come tonight. Claire sighed quietly. That would have made this worse. Vincent smirked slightly. True. For the first time all evening, something close to warmth appeared in Claire's eyes. Ethan noticed it instantly, and suddenly a terrifying realization crashed into him. The woman he spent years treating like she needed him, never actually needed him at all. Claire had not been weak. She had been choosing a smaller life because she loved him. Vanessa grabbed Ethan's arm tightly. Say something, she whispered harshly. But Ethan could not stop staring at Claire. Memories hit him all at once. The way she never cared about expensive gifts. The way she understood contracts without explanation during business meetings. The way major investors strangely respected her opinions despite believing she was just Ethan's quiet wife. Even the apartment she insisted they move into years ago suddenly made sense now. It had not been cheap at all. Ethan simply could not recognize real wealth back then. Alexander glanced toward the giant screen one final time. Take those photos down. The production crew moved instantly. Within seconds, every humiliating image disappeared from the ballroom screen completely. But the damage to Ethan had already started. Because across the room, phones continued vibrating one after another. The sound of vibrating phones spread across the ballroom like falling dominoes. One notification after another lit up screens throughout the crowd. Executives glanced downward. Investors frowned. Assistants whispered urgently into ears. The energy inside the gala no longer felt glamorous. It felt unstable. Ethan noticed it immediately. What is going on? He asked sharply toward one of his board members near the front table. The man hesitated before answering. There are rumors online about Morgan Capital making changes to several active partnerships tonight. Vanessa looked confused. So what? That has nothing to do with us. Nobody responded to her. Because deep down, everyone in the room understood exactly what it might have to do with. Ethan forced himself to stand straighter. He had spent years building influence in rooms exactly like this one. He refused to panic publicly. Claire, he said carefully, trying to sound calm. If this is some kind of misunderstanding, we can discuss it privately. Claire looked at him quietly. Privately. Ethan swallowed. Yes. Claire glanced slowly around the ballroom, filled with people still staring at them. Interesting choice of word after tonight. Several guests immediately looked away in embarrassment. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, one of the gala organizers rushed toward Alexander Morgan with visible anxiety. Mr. Morgan, the man said nervously. We had no idea Miss Morgan was your sister. If we had known. Alexander raised one hand slightly, stopping him. You already showed us everything we needed to see. The organizer's face turned pale instantly. Nearby executives began distancing themselves from Ethan physically now. Chairs shifted. Conversation stopped when he approached. Investors who spent the last 2 years begging for access to coal ventures suddenly looked uncertain about even standing beside him. Vanessa noticed it too. This is ridiculous, she whispered harshly. People are overreacting. Vincent gave a soft laugh nearby. No, he said calmly. They are reacting exactly the correct amount. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. Claire is still his ex-wife. Whatever happened between them is personal. Daniel looked directly at her. You publicly humiliated our sister in front of 300 people. Vanessa tried to recover quickly. I spilled a drink. It was not intentional. Claire said nothing, but the silence itself made the lie look pathetic. Ethan rubbed his jaw nervously before forcing another smile toward Alexander. I respect your family tremendously, Mr. Morgan. Truly. But Claire and I have history. Emotions got involved tonight. Alexander studied him for a moment. Do you know the difference between rich people and powerful people, Ethan? Ethan frowned slightly. I'm not sure what you mean. Alexander adjusted his cufflink calmly. Rich people think money protects them. He glanced around the ballroom slowly. Powerful people know reputation is worth more. Ethan's face tightened. The sentence landed harder than a threat. Across the ballroom, several reporters who had been invited to cover the charity gala were now openly recording every second of the confrontation. One business journalist whispered, "Cole is finished," under his breath while typing rapidly into his phone. Vanessa grabbed Ethan's arm again. We should leave, she whispered. Urgently this time. But Ethan did not move. Because his pride was fighting his survival instinct. Claire watched him carefully. For years, she used to admire Ethan's confidence. Now she finally understood the truth. Confidence without loyalty eventually turns into arrogance. And arrogance always collapses the same way. Publicly, one of Ethan's senior investors suddenly approached him with visible concern. Ethan, the man muttered quietly. We need to talk now. Ethan frowned. About what? The investor glanced nervously toward the Morgan brothers before lowering his voice further. Two banks already paused tomorrow's financing review after seeing tonight online. Ethan stared at him. What? Social media is exploding right now. Reporters are calling this corporate suicide. Vanessa shook her head immediately. This is insane. People cannot destroy a company over divorce drama. Vincent smiled faintly. You would be surprised what destroys companies these days. Ethan stepped closer to Claire now, his voice dropping lower. Did you plan this? Claire blinked slowly. Plan what? Them showing up. Claire held his gaze steadily. No. Ethan searched her expression desperately, trying to find weakness again, trying to find the woman he thought he understood. But she looked different tonight. Not louder, not crueler, just untouchable. And that terrified him more than anger ever could. Claire, he said quietly, if you wanted revenge, congratulations. You made your point. Claire's expression barely changed. You still think this is revenge? Ethan frowned. What else would it be? Claire glanced toward the ballroom screen, where his company logo still glowed above the stage. Consequences. The word hit him like cold water. Nearby, Daniel checked his phone briefly before looking toward Alexander. It already started. Ethan noticed the exchange immediately. Started what? Nobody answered him. Instead, Alexander calmly turned toward Claire. Are you ready? Claire looked down at the folded document still inside her purse. For the first time all night, a small shadow of emotion crossed her face. Not fear, not hesitation, more like disappointment finally settling into certainty. I really hoped he would stop before this point, she admitted softly. Ethan stared at her. Before what point? Claire slowly removed the folded document from her purse at last. Several nearby guests leaned forward trying to see it. Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically. What is that supposed to be? Claire unfolded the papers carefully while Ethan watched her every movement. Then his face changed completely. Because he recognized the Morgan Capital letterhead immediately. His stomach dropped. No, he whispered. Claire looked at him calmly. You remember the Harbor Tech expansion deal you celebrated 3 months ago? Ethan's breathing slowed. What about it? You thought your company won that contract because of your presentation. Ethan said nothing. Claire continued quietly. Morgan Capital approved it because I asked them to. Ethan's eyes widened. That is impossible. Vincent laughed softly. Actually, that is exactly how it happened. Ethan looked between the brothers in disbelief. Why would she need to ask for anything? You are telling me Claire had influence over Morgan Capital this entire time. Alexander answered calmly. Claire has influence over everything connected to this family. The room exploded into whispers again. Vanessa shook her head rapidly. No. No way. If she was really that powerful, why live in a tiny apartment with you? Why stay married after all the cheating rumors? Claire finally looked directly at Vanessa again. Because I loved him. Silence crashed down instantly. Even Ethan looked stunned hearing the words spoken out loud after everything that happened tonight. Claire folded the document slowly in her hands. I gave up private jets, family events, trust funds, security teams, and board seats because I believed love mattered more than status. Her eyes shifted toward Ethan. That was my mistake. Ethan's face drained of color, because suddenly every sacrifice Claire ever made replayed inside his mind from a completely different perspective. She had not depended on him. She had chosen him, and he had spent years treating that choice like weakness. Daniel checked another message on his phone before speaking. Calmly, stock analysts are already asking questions. Ethan turned sharply. Questions about what? Daniel looked directly at him. Why Morgan Capital is suddenly withdrawing from every pending negotiation connected to coal ventures. The entire ballroom went dead silent again. For several long seconds, nobody inside the ballroom moved. The silence felt heavy now. Not dramatic. Dangerous. Ethan stared at Daniel Morgan like he was waiting for someone to laugh and admit this was all some twisted misunderstanding. But nobody laughed. Around the room, phones continued lighting up nonstop as more alerts flooded into inboxes and financial apps. Ethan's chief financial officer suddenly rushed through the crowd toward him with panic written all over his face. Ethan, the man whispered urgently. We have a serious problem. Ethan turned sharply. Not now. It cannot wait. The man lowered his voice even further. 3 institutional partners just suspended negotiations with us. Ethan's jaw tightened. Why? The executive looked toward the Morgan brothers nervously before answering. Because Morgan Capital exited their advisory position 20 minutes ago. Vanessa blinked in confusion. Exited what? But Ethan understood immediately. His face lost even more color. Morgan Capital was not just another investor connected to coal ventures. They were the signal, the safety stamp, the invisible reason banks trusted him, media praised him, and investors lined up behind his projects. Without Morgan Capital quietly backing him from the shadows, every risk tied to Ethan suddenly looked real. And people hated risk more than they loved success. Ethan looked directly at Claire. You did this tonight? Claire held his gaze calmly. No, Ethan frowned angrily. Then why is this happening? Claire's expression never changed. Because eventually the truth catches up to people. Vanessa stepped forward defensively. This is ridiculous. You cannot destroy someone because your feelings got hurt. Vincent gave her a cold smile. Nobody destroyed him. He glanced toward Ethan. He did that himself. Several reporters nearby immediately typed the quote into their phones. Ethan noticed and snapped. Put those cameras down. But nobody listened anymore. The power dynamic had completely shifted. Earlier tonight, Ethan controlled the room with a microphone and a spotlight. Now he looked like a man slowly realizing the floor beneath him was disappearing. Claire watched him quietly. 5 years. 5 years of defending him, supporting him, believing in him before anyone else did. She remembered sleeping beside him while he stayed awake building pitch decks until 4 in the morning. She remembered selling jewelry to help cover payroll during his company's first crisis. She remembered ignoring rumors about other women because she convinced herself ambition changed people temporarily. But standing here now, Claire finally understood something painful. Ethan had not changed because of success. Success had simply revealed who he already was. Alexander looked toward Claire gently. You do not have to stay here anymore. Claire glanced around the ballroom. Guests who mocked her earlier now avoided eye contact entirely. Some looked ashamed. Others looked terrified of being associated with Ethan. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. People are acting like she is royalty. Daniel answered calmly. No, he glanced at Claire. They are acting like she matters. Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically, but her confidence sounded weaker now. Please. If Claire was so important, why hide for 5 years? Vincent smirked slightly. Because unlike some people, she did not need attention to feel valuable. A few guests nearby quietly laughed at Vanessa this time instead of with her. She noticed immediately. Ethan suddenly stepped closer to Claire again, lowering his voice. Tell them to stop. Claire looked at him carefully. Stop what? The withdrawals. The calls. Whatever is happening behind the scenes. Claire almost looked sad hearing him say that. Because even now, Ethan still thought this was about money. You still do not understand, she said softly. Ethan's frustration finally cracked through his polished image. Then explain it to me. Claire looked directly into his eyes. Tonight was the first time my family saw how you treated me when cameras were watching. Ethan said nothing. Claire continued quietly. Imagine what they think happened when nobody was watching. The sentence hit harder than any scream could have. Ethan immediately realized the trap he had built for himself. By humiliating Claire publicly, he accidentally confirmed every private concern her brothers might have secretly feared for years. Alexander stepped beside Claire again. "Do you know why we stayed silent after the divorce?" he asked Ethan calmly. Ethan shook his head slowly. "Because Claire asked us to." Ethan stared at Claire in disbelief. Alexander continued. "She protected your reputation even after everything." Vanessa looked stunned. "Why would you do that?" Claire answered without emotion. "Because I loved him." Ethan visibly flinched hearing those words again. Daniel checked another notification on his phone before speaking quietly toward Alexander. The media picked it up. Vincent smirked faintly. That was fast. One of the giant television screens near the ballroom bar suddenly changed from the Gala slideshow to a live financial news segment. Several guests turned toward it immediately. The anchor appeared visibly excited. "Breaking tonight," the reporter announced. Morgan Capital Holdings has unexpectedly terminated multiple pending affiliations with Cole Ventures International following what sources describe as a controversial incident at a Manhattan charity gala. Gasps spread across the ballroom. Ethan looked frozen. The reporter continued speaking while photos from earlier that evening appeared beside the broadcast. Industry insiders are already questioning whether tonight's events could impact Cole Ventures' upcoming expansion plans and future investor confidence. Vanessa whispered, "Oh my God." Claire noticed something almost surreal at that moment. Ethan was no longer worried about humiliating her. He was terrified about becoming her. Public embarrassment suddenly did not feel entertaining anymore now that he stood on the receiving end of it. Ethan turned desperately toward Alexander. "You cannot punish an entire company over personal issues." Alexander remained calm. "We are not punishing anyone." Ethan's voice rose. "Slightly. Then what would you call this?" Alexander looked at him steadily. "Re-evaluating character." The ballroom fell silent again. Because everybody in that room understood the truth behind business power. Investors did not just buy numbers. They bought trust, reputation, stability. And tonight, Ethan publicly proved that he was willing to humiliate the woman who sacrificed everything for him simply because she no longer benefited his image. If he could betray loyalty that easily in marriage, what would stop him from betraying partners, investors, or employees? Ethan finally understood the real disaster unfolding around him. This was not about Claire exposing him. It was about him exposing himself. Vanessa suddenly grabbed Ethan's hand tightly. "We need to leave now." But before Ethan could respond, another executive rushed toward him looking pale. "The board wants an emergency call immediately." Ethan stared blankly. "Right now?" "Yes." The man hesitated nervously before adding, "And several shareholders are demanding clarification about your relationship with Morgan Capital." Ethan rubbed both hands across his face slowly, trying to think, trying to regain control. But every time he looked up, all he saw was Claire standing calmly beside her brothers while his entire world unraveled in real time. And somehow that calmness terrified him most of all. Claire had not screamed. She had not threatened him. She had not begged anyone to ruin him. She simply stood there quietly while the truth destroyed him on its own. Vanessa suddenly pointed toward Claire angrily. "Say something. Tell them this is not fair." Claire looked at her evenly. "Fair?" Vanessa's face tightened. Claire stepped slightly closer now, her voice remaining calm enough to cut deeper than shouting ever could. "You mocked me when you thought I had no power." Vanessa stayed silent. Claire tilted her head slightly. "Now suddenly fairness matters?" Vanessa looked away immediately. Ethan watched Claire carefully, almost like he was seeing her for the first time. Not weak, not emotional, not broken, just controlled, powerful in a way that did not need attention. And that realization hurt him more than losing money ever could. Because for the first time in 5 years, Ethan Cole understood the real tragedy of his divorce. He had not abandoned an ordinary woman for someone better. He had betrayed the one person who loved him before the world knew his name. The ballroom no longer sounded like a celebration. The orchestra had stopped completely now, replaced by nervous whispers, vibrating phones, and the quiet panic of wealthy people realizing they might be standing too close to a public collapse. Ethan remained frozen near the center stage, while financial news continued playing across the giant television screens around the room. Every few seconds, another alert appeared at the bottom of the broadcast. Market analysts reacting, investors questioning stability, rumors spreading faster than anyone could contain them. Vanessa looked overwhelmed now. The confidence she wore earlier had completely disappeared. She tugged lightly on Ethan's sleeve again. "We seriously need to get out of here." Ethan barely heard her. His eyes stayed locked on Claire. The same woman he publicly humiliated less than an hour ago now stood calmly beside one of the most powerful families in the country while his empire began cracking apart in real time. And the worst part was not the money. It was the realization that Claire never once tried to stop him from becoming this version of himself, because she believed he would eventually remember who he used to be. But he never did. One of Ethan's younger executives suddenly approached with visible fear in his expression. "Sir," the man whispered carefully, "social media is already calling this the Gala divorce disaster." Vanessa groaned under her breath. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "How bad?" The executive hesitated. "Bad enough that multiple clients are publicly distancing themselves already." Ethan looked furious now. "Over one night." Alexander answered before the employee could. "No, Ethan." He adjusted his watch calmly. "Over character." Ethan snapped toward him immediately. "You keep saying that like I committed some unforgivable crime." Daniel looked at him coldly. "You humiliated someone who protected you for years because you thought she could not fight back." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out, because there was no defense against the truth when spoken that clearly. Claire watched him quietly. She remembered another night years ago when Ethan stood in a cheap suit outside a Manhattan investment conference because security refused to let him inside without proper credentials. Back then, Claire spent 2 hours convincing a senior investor to give Ethan 5 minutes to pitch his idea. Ethan never discovered that conversation happened. He simply believed his talent opened the door. Claire let him believe it because she wanted him to feel proud of himself. Looking back now, maybe that was her mistake. She protected his ego so well that eventually he forgot who protected him at all. Vincent suddenly glanced toward the ballroom entrance before speaking quietly into an earpiece. A few seconds later, more Morgan security personnel entered discreetly. Not aggressive, just organized. The kind of movement that signaled preparation. Ethan noticed immediately. "What now?" Vincent gave a small shrug. "Precaution." Ethan laughed bitterly. "You think I am dangerous?" Vincent looked at him calmly. "No. Desperate." That word hit harder than Ethan expected, because deep down, he knew it was true. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something unfamiliar creeping into his chest. Fear. Real fear. Not fear of losing money. Fear of losing control. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly and looked toward Claire with visible resentment. "You really enjoy this, do you not?" Claire met her eyes evenly. "Enjoy what?" "Watching his life fall apart." Claire's expression remained unreadable. "No," Vanessa scoffed. "Please." Claire glanced briefly toward Ethan before answering quietly. "I already watched that happen during our marriage." Ethan visibly flinched again. Around them, several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. Earlier tonight, people laughed at Claire's pain because they assumed she was weak. Now every sentence she spoke felt heavier because the room finally understood she never needed to defend herself. The truth was doing it for her. A senior banker near the bar suddenly approached Alexander carefully. "Mr. Morgan," the man said nervously, "our firm would appreciate clarification regarding future partnerships connected to coal ventures." Ethan turned sharply. "You are discussing my company while I am standing right here?" The banker avoided eye contact. Alexander answered calmly. "You discussed my sister while she was standing right here." Silence. Ethan clenched his jaw tightly. The sentence cut through the room with surgical precision. Claire slowly looked around the ballroom again. Earlier tonight, this place felt enormous. Bright. Loud. Humiliating. Now it felt strangely small. Like the illusion had finally broken. Wealthy people pretending morality mattered until money entered the conversation. Friends disappearing the second status became unstable. Cameras shifting toward whichever side looked stronger. Nothing in this room was genuine except consequences. Daniel stepped beside Claire quietly. "Mother is watching the live coverage." Claire sighed softly. "That cannot be good." Vincent smirked faintly. "She wanted to send a helicopter." Claire actually laughed under her breath for the first time all evening. The sound surprised Ethan more than anything else tonight, because it reminded him of who Claire used to be before years of disappointment slowly made her quieter. He suddenly remembered Sunday mornings in their old apartment. Claire laughing while making pancakes. Claire dancing barefoot in the kitchen while music played from her phone. Claire believing in him so completely that failure never seemed possible when she looked at him. Ethan felt sick realizing he had not heard that version of her laugh in years. And somehow Vanessa standing beside him suddenly felt incredibly empty by comparison. Vanessa noticed his expression immediately. "Do not do that." Ethan looked confused. "Do what?" "Look at her like that." Ethan stayed silent. Vanessa's voice sharpened slightly. "You made your choice." Claire looked away quietly. That sentence hurt more than she expected. Not because she wanted Ethan back. That part of her had died slowly long before the divorce papers were signed. But because hearing another woman claim ownership over the man she once sacrificed everything for made the last 5 years feel painfully real. Alexander noticed the change in Claire's expression instantly. His voice softened. "We can leave whenever you want." Claire nodded faintly. But before anyone moved, another notification sound echoed across the ballroom. Then another. Then dozens more. Guests checked their phones almost simultaneously. One investor cursed quietly under his breath. Ethan grabbed his own phone immediately, and his face went completely white. Vanessa leaned toward the screen. "What happened?" Ethan stared silently for several seconds before answering. "The board," his voice sounded distant now. "They are scheduling an emergency vote." Claire understood immediately. Public companies feared scandal more than failure. Investors could survive losses. They could not survive distrust. Ethan looked toward Alexander with genuine panic now. "You planned this." Alexander shook his head once. "No," Ethan's voice rose. "Then why is everything collapsing at once?" Alexander answered calmly. "Because powerful people survive mistakes." He glanced around the ballroom slowly. "But they rarely survive humiliation." Ethan looked confused. Alexander continued. "You humiliated the wrong person in the wrong room in front of the wrong audience." The sentence settled heavily over everyone listening. Vanessa whispered softly, "This cannot be real." Vincent looked toward her with faint amusement. "Oh, it is very real." Claire watched Ethan carefully now. The expensive tuxedo. The perfect image. The confidence. It was all cracking apart right in front of her. And suddenly she realized something important. Ethan never actually loved power. He loved validation. The applause. The admiration. The feeling of being envied. That was why public humiliation terrified him so much. Because without admiration, he did not know who he was anymore. Ethan suddenly stepped closer to Claire one final time. His voice dropped low enough that only nearby people could hear. "Tell me honestly." Claire looked at him quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. "If I had treated you differently tonight, would any of this still be happening?" Claire stared at him for several long seconds before finally answering. "No." Ethan looked like someone punched the air out of his lungs. Because in that moment, he finally understood the full weight of what he destroyed. Not just a marriage. Not just trust. He destroyed the only person powerful enough to save him, and the only person who ever wanted to. The question hung in the air between them like broken glass. Ethan stared at Claire after her answer, unable to hide the devastation slowly spreading across his face. No, one word. Calm. Honest. Final. If he had treated her differently tonight, none of this would have happened. No collapsing partnerships. No terrified investors. No emergency board meetings. No headlines turning him into a public disaster. Ethan looked away for the first time all evening because suddenly he could not stand seeing himself reflected in Claire's eyes. Vanessa stepped closer to him quickly. "Ethan, stop blaming yourself. This is manipulation." Claire said nothing. She no longer needed to defend herself. Reality was doing that for her now. Across the ballroom, guests continued quietly leaving in groups. Some avoided eye contact with Ethan entirely. Others shook hands politely with the Morgan brothers before disappearing toward the exits. The gala was dying in real time. Not because of scandal, because powerful people understood something important. Once reputation begins collapsing publicly, survival becomes a race to create distance. Ethan's phone rang again. Then again. Then again. He silenced call after call without answering. The screen showed board members, investors, legal advisors, reporters. Everyone wanted something from him now. Clarification. Damage control. Answers. But Ethan barely knew what answer to give himself anymore. Claire watched him carefully. She remembered the first time Ethan received a business call during dinner years ago. He apologized 3 times before taking it, because he thought interrupting time together was disrespectful. Somewhere along the way, success stopped being something Ethan wanted to build and became something he needed to worship. And everything else slowly became disposable, including her. Daniel glanced toward the ballroom television screens again as another financial segment appeared. This story is spreading faster than expected. Vincent gave a quiet laugh. Public humiliation always trends. Ethan clenched his jaw. Can you stop talking about me like I am already dead? Alexander answered calmly. Then stop acting like the victim. Silence crashed over the area around them again. Vanessa looked furious now. This is unbelievable. Claire embarrasses Ethan publicly, and somehow everyone acts like she is innocent. Claire finally turned toward her fully. I embarrassed him? Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. You knew exactly what your family would do. Claire's expression remained steady. No, Vanessa scoffed. Please. Claire stepped slightly closer. You humiliated me because you thought nobody important would care. Vanessa opened her mouth, but Claire continued before she could interrupt. That was your mistake, not mine. Several nearby guests quietly exchanged looks again. Even now, Claire never raised her voice, never lost control, and somehow that composure made every word hit harder. Ethan rubbed his forehead slowly before speaking again. Claire, please. The word shocked everyone nearby. Please. Earlier tonight, Ethan stood on stage mocking her in front of hundreds of people. Now his voice sounded almost desperate. Claire looked at him quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. I know I messed up. Vanessa turned toward him instantly. Excuse me. Ethan ignored her completely. His eyes stayed locked on Claire. I should never have done that to you tonight. Claire's face revealed almost nothing, but inside her chest something painful twisted unexpectedly. Because part of her had waited years to hear accountability from him. Not excuses, not manipulation, not blame, just honesty. But hearing it now felt empty. Too late. Ethan stepped closer carefully. You were right about me. Claire stayed silent. Ethan laughed bitterly under his breath. God, you were right about everything. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. Ethan, he still ignored her. You warned me this world would change me. His voice sounded quieter now, more exhausted. And I thought you were just insecure because you did not understand ambition. Claire remembered that argument perfectly. 3 years ago, Ethan returning home at 2 in the morning after another private party filled with investors and influencers. Claire telling him he no longer sounded happy when he talked about success. Ethan accusing her of holding him back because she did not understand what greatness required. Back then, Claire cried herself to sleep after that fight. Tonight, she just felt tired. I understood ambition, Claire said softly. I just did not think it was supposed to cost your soul. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. The sentence landed brutally because deep down he knew exactly when it happened. The first time he lied to secure a deal. The first time he ignored Claire during dinner to impress strangers online. The first time attention from younger women felt more exciting than loyalty from the woman who built his life beside him. Tiny compromises. Tiny betrayals. Each one feeling harmless until eventually he became someone even he barely recognized. Vanessa suddenly grabbed his arm hard enough to pull his attention back toward her. You are seriously apologizing to her right now? Ethan looked irritated for the first time toward Vanessa. Not now. Vanessa laughed in disbelief. Wow. She stepped backward slowly. So this is what happens. Your company gets shaky for 1 hour, and suddenly you remember your ex-wife exists. Ethan's face darkened slightly. Do not do this. Vanessa shook her head. No. I want to understand. Her voice sharpened with humiliation now. Was I just convenient? Is that it? Ethan stayed silent. And that silence answered everything. Vanessa's expression cracked instantly. Earlier tonight, she felt powerful because she thought she replaced Claire. Now she finally understood the truth. She was never the upgrade. She was simply the distraction Ethan used while destroying the only real relationship in his life. Claire looked away quietly. Watching Vanessa realize that truth almost made her feel sorry for her. Almost. Alexander stepped slightly in front of Claire again as more reporters gathered near the ballroom entrance. Hoping for statements. It is time to leave. Claire nodded faintly. But before she could move, Ethan spoke again. Wait. His voice sounded rough now. desperate in a way nobody in this room had probably ever heard from him before. Claire paused. Ethan stared at her like a man watching the last stable thing in his life preparing to disappear forever. Did you ever hate me? The question surprised even Claire. She looked at him carefully for several long seconds before answering honestly. No, Ethan's chest tightened visibly. Claire continued quietly. That was the problem. Because hatred would have been easier. Cleaner. Hatred meant emotional distance. But Claire loved Ethan long after he stopped deserving it. Long after the lies. Long after the disrespect. Long after she realized the marriage was collapsing. And somehow that truth hurt Ethan more than anger ever could. Around them, the ballroom continued emptying while financial news coverage replayed clips from earlier in the evening. Ethan standing on stage. Ethan mocking Claire. Vanessa laughing beside him. The images already looked different now. Not powerful. Cruel. Embarrassing. Small. Daniel checked another message before looking toward Alexander. The board suspended tomorrow's acquisition announcement. Ethan looked up sharply. What? Daniel answered calmly. Nobody wants their company attached to scandal right now. Ethan looked physically sick hearing that. Months of negotiations. Media campaigns. Investor confidence. Everything unraveling because of one public moment fueled by arrogance. Claire watched him silently. Earlier tonight, Ethan believed public humiliation made him powerful. Now he finally understood the truth. Public humiliation only works when the audience respects the person delivering it. And tonight, that respect died the second people saw how he treated someone who loved him. By the time the clock passed 11:30, the ballroom barely resembled the glamorous gala Ethan imagined earlier that evening. Half the tables sat empty now. Champagne glasses remained abandoned beside untouched dinners, while reporters crowded near the exits waiting for more reactions. Employees whispered. In corners, investors slipped out quietly before cameras could connect them to the disaster unfolding inside the Grand Astoria. The empire Ethan spent years building was not collapsing all at once. It was dissolving piece by piece in front of everyone watching. Claire stood near the ballroom entrance beside her brothers while assistants prepared their departure outside. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she mostly felt exhausted. There was no satisfaction in watching someone destroy themselves when you once loved them enough to protect them from everything, including their own worst instincts. Ethan remained several feet away staring at her like he was trying to memorize every detail before losing access forever. Vanessa had disappeared toward the bar almost 20 minutes ago after another humiliating argument with him in front of several guests. Claire did not care where she went. That story no longer mattered to her. The only thing Claire could not stop thinking about was how quickly love can turn into distance once respect disappears. Alexander glanced toward her quietly. The car is ready. Claire nodded slowly, but before she could move, Ethan stepped forward again. Claire, wait. Daniel immediately stiffened beside her, but Claire raised one hand slightly. It is fine. Ethan looked terrible now. The polished confidence from earlier was completely gone. His tie hung loose around his collar. His expression looked drained. For the first time in years, he looked less like a celebrity entrepreneur and more like the exhausted man she used to sit beside at 2 in the morning while he worried about unpaid invoices and impossible deadlines. I just need 5 minutes, Ethan said quietly. Alexander looked unconvinced. You already had 5 years. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly before speaking again. Please. Claire studied him carefully, then finally nodded once. 5 minutes. Alexander hesitated before stepping away with Daniel and Vincent toward the entrance, though all three remained close enough to intervene if necessary. Ethan looked around the nearly empty ballroom before laughing bitterly under his breath. Funny. Claire stayed silent. Ethan shook his head slowly. A few hours ago this room felt full of people who respected me. Claire looked toward the abandoned tables. They respected success. Ethan gave a hollow smile. Same thing. Claire met his eyes calmly. No, it is not. Ethan exhaled heavily. Deep down, he already knew she was right. Respect built on money disappears the second money looks unstable. Real respect survives failure. And Ethan suddenly realized Claire respected him most when he had absolutely nothing. That realization hurt worse than every financial headline spreading online tonight. I do not even know when I became this person, Ethan admitted quietly. Claire answered honestly. I think part of you was always there. Ethan looked away. Probably. Silence settled between them for several seconds. Not angry silence. Sad silence. The kind shared between two people realizing the relationship died long before either one admitted it out loud. Ethan rubbed both hands across his face slowly. Do you remember our first apartment? Claire blinked softly, surprised by the question. Brooklyn? Ethan nodded. The place above the laundromat. Despite herself, Claire almost smiled faintly. The pipes made that awful noise every winter. Ethan laughed quietly. You used to hit them with a frying pan. Claire looked down briefly. It worked. Ethan stared at her carefully, and for one painful moment it felt like time folded backward. Before the fame, before the interviews, before the assistants, luxury parties, and endless ego. Back when they were just two exhausted people trying to survive together in New York City. You were happy back then, Ethan said softly. Claire answered immediately. So were you. Ethan swallowed hard. Because that was the truth he kept avoiding. He spent years chasing bigger houses, more attention, more status, more admiration because he convinced himself success would finally make him feel complete. But the happiest version of himself already existed years ago beside Claire in a tiny apartment with almost nothing. And he traded that life away for applause from strangers. I thought I needed all this, Ethan admitted quietly while glancing around the ballroom. The money, the image, the attention. Claire crossed her arms lightly. And did it make you happy? Ethan looked around the empty room again. The answer sat everywhere. In the abandoned chairs, the canceled partnerships, the disappearing investors, the woman who no longer looked at him with love in her eyes. No, he whispered. Claire felt a sharp ache in her chest hearing that honesty because once upon a time, she would have done anything to hear Ethan admit that. But now it changed nothing. Ethan stepped slightly closer. I know I do not deserve another chance. Claire stayed silent. Honestly, he continued, I probably stopped deserving one a long time ago. Claire looked at him carefully. Then why are you saying this? Ethan laughed weakly under his breath. Because tonight I finally understood something. He looked directly into her eyes. You loved me before anyone else believed I mattered. Claire's throat tightened slightly. Ethan continued quietly. And instead of protecting that, I treated it like something guaranteed. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The orchestra equipment was already being packed away in the background now. Staff members quietly cleaned tables while security directed remaining reporters outside. The night was ending. Ethan glanced toward the ballroom stage where his company logo still glowed faintly above the dark screens. I spent years trying to impress people who would disappear the second I stopped being useful. His eyes slowly returned to Claire. Meanwhile, the one person who never asked me for anything was standing beside me the entire time. Claire finally spoke softly. I did ask you for something. Ethan frowned slightly. What? Claire's expression remained calm, but her voice carried years of disappointment inside it. Respect. Ethan looked like the word physically hurt him, because suddenly he remembered every moment he dismissed her feelings to protect his ego. Every time he made her feel small in front of investors. Every late-night argument where he accused her of not supporting his ambition simply because she questioned the person he was becoming. Claire never wanted Ethan to fail. She just wanted him to stay human while succeeding. Ethan stared at her with genuine regret now. Not performative regret. Not public relations regret. Real regret. The kind that arrives too late to fix anything. I am sorry, he whispered. Claire believed him. That was the tragedy. She genuinely believed he meant it. But apologies arrive differently once love dies from exhaustion instead of anger. Claire looked toward the ballroom entrance where her brothers waited beside the open doors. Then she looked back at Ethan one final time. I hope someday you become someone you can actually respect again. Ethan's eyes lowered slowly. And you? Claire adjusted Alexander's jacket around her shoulders gently. I think I spent too many years waiting for someone else to choose me. Ethan looked back up immediately. Claire gave him a calm, almost peaceful expression. I am done waiting now. Those words shattered something inside him far more completely than losing investors or money ever could. Because for the first time all night, Ethan truly understood what he lost. Not status, not stability, not business opportunities. He lost the one person who loved him when there was absolutely nothing to gain from it. And now she was finally walking away without looking back. Cold night air rushed across the front steps of the Grand Astoria Hotel as Claire walked through the entrance beside her brothers. Behind them, flashes from cameras exploded non-stop, while reporters shouted questions into the chaos. Miss Morgan, is Morgan Capital officially cutting ties with Coal Ventures? Alexander, is the board preparing legal action? Claire, did you know tonight would happen? None of the Morgan siblings answered. Security calmly guided them toward the line of black vehicles waiting beneath the glowing Manhattan skyline. Claire paused for half a second before stepping into the limousine. From outside, she could still hear the distant noise spilling from the ballroom behind her. Earlier that evening, those sounds represented power and prestige. Now they sounded hollow, like a collapsing performance finally reaching its final act. Alexander entered the limousine first, followed by Daniel and Vincent. The doors closed softly behind them, instantly shutting out the noise of reporters and flashing cameras. Silence settled inside the vehicle for several moments while the city lights reflected against the tinted windows. Claire leaned back against the leather seat slowly and closed her eyes for the first time all night. Exhaustion hit her immediately. Emotional exhaustion. The kind that comes after holding yourself together for too long in front of people who wanted to watch you break. Daniel loosened his tie slightly before looking at her carefully. You okay? Claire nodded faintly. I think so. Vincent handed her a bottle of water from the minibar. Mother already called me 6 times. Claire laughed softly under her breath. That sounds right. Alexander shook his head with faint amusement. She wants Ethan investigated, sued, exposed publicly, and possibly erased from Manhattan. Claire took a sip of water while staring out the window at the city passing outside. That seems excessive. Vincent smirked. Actually, for her, that is restraint. For the first time all evening, the tension inside Claire's chest eased slightly. Her brothers had always been like this. Protective without making her feel weak. Powerful without needing to announce it constantly. Somewhere along the way during her marriage, Claire forgot what healthy loyalty felt like. Daniel studied her expression quietly. You still love him? The question lingered heavily inside the limousine. Claire stayed silent for several seconds before answering honestly. I do not know. Alexander nodded slowly like he already understood the answer. Because love does not disappear instantly the moment someone betrays you. Sometimes it fades slowly, quietly, piece by piece, until eventually all that remains is grief for the version of them you thought existed. Vincent checked his phone again before letting out a low whistle. This is getting worse fast. Claire frowned slightly. What now? Vincent turned the screen toward the others. Financial news headlines flooded every major business platform. Coal Ventures stock expected to drop after Gala scandal. Morgan Capital distances itself from Ethan Coal. Investors question leadership stability following public incident. Claire looked away from the phone after only a few seconds. She felt no joy reading any of it. That surprised even her. Earlier in the marriage, she used to fantasize about Ethan finally understanding her value after treating her like she was disposable. But reality felt emptier than revenge fantasies. Because no public humiliation could restore the years she spent loving someone who slowly stopped seeing her clearly. Alexander leaned back calmly. The board will force him into damage control immediately. Daniel nodded. Probably an apology tour within 48 hours. Vincent laughed softly. Too late for that. Claire looked down quietly at her hands folded in her lap. I never wanted this. Her brothers exchanged brief glances. Alexander spoke gently. We know. Claire sighed softly. I just wanted him to stop treating me like I was nothing. The limousine became quiet again. Outside, Manhattan glowed with late-night traffic, neon signs, and endless movement. Inside the vehicle, Claire suddenly remembered another night years ago when Ethan borrowed his friend's old car just so they could drive across the Brooklyn Bridge after midnight because she felt homesick. They parked near the waterfront eating cheap pizza while Ethan promised her one day he would build a life big enough to make all her sacrifices worth it. Back then, Claire believed every word. Daniel noticed the sadness crossing her face. You are mourning the man he used to be. Claire looked toward him slowly. Daniel continued quietly. Not the man standing in that ballroom tonight. Claire swallowed hard because he was right. The version of Ethan she truly loved probably disappeared long before the divorce papers were signed. She simply kept hoping he would come back. Vincent suddenly leaned forward slightly. There is something else. Alexander gave him a warning glance. Not tonight. Vincent ignored him. She deserves to know. Claire frowned. Know what? Vincent reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin black folder before handing it to her. Claire looked confused as she opened it slowly. Inside were acquisition documents, ownership transfers, legal signatures. Her eyes widened slightly while reading the top page. What is this? Alexander answered calmly. Morgan Capital finalized the acquisition this morning. Claire looked up immediately. Acquisition of what? Daniel gave a faint smile. Cole Ventures International. Silence filled the limousine. Claire stared down at the paperwork again in disbelief. Wait, you bought Ethan's company. Vincent nodded casually. 51% controlling interest. Claire blinked several times. Today. Alexander folded his hands calmly. The contracts finished processing around noon. Claire looked stunned. Before the gala? Yes. Claire looked between all three brothers. You planned this. Alexander shook his head immediately. No, Daniel answered honestly. We plan to protect you financially after the divorce. Vincent smirked faintly. The public disaster tonight was entirely Ethan's contribution. Claire stared back down at the documents. Her signature line already waited near the bottom of the final page. Why is my name attached to this? Alexander's voice softened. Because technically, you now control the majority voting power. Claire looked speechless. Daniel leaned back calmly. Congratulations. Vincent grinned slightly. Your ex-husband accidentally spent the evening humiliating his new majority owner. Despite everything, Claire suddenly laughed. A real laugh this time. Shocked, exhausted, almost disbelieving. The absurdity of the situation finally hit all at once. Ethan spent years trying to build an empire impressive enough to make Claire feel small beside him. And now, without even realizing it, he had publicly destroyed himself in front of the woman who legally controlled his company. Alexander watched her carefully. What do you want to do? Claire looked down at the final signature page again. Outside the limousine windows, the Grand Astoria Hotel slowly disappeared farther behind them as the driver pulled into late-night Manhattan traffic. Somewhere back inside that building, Ethan was probably still fighting reporters, board members, investors, and the realization that his entire life changed in one night. Claire remained quiet for several long seconds before finally speaking. Everyone expects revenge. Vincent smiled faintly. That would be understandable. Claire slowly closed the folder in her lap. Then she looked out at the city lights reflecting across the glass window beside her. No, she said softly. I have a better idea.